500 years ago, England was not yet a great power. A civil war had just torn its own nobility apart. It had lost almost all the land its kings once ruled in France. Bigger, richer kingdoms across the Channel barely noticed it. But England's power did not stay small. It grew into the largest empire in human history. Then, generations later, it nearly ran out of money completely. How did one small island find power in 3 different ways? First through finance, then through industry, and finally, after its empire was gone. The answer was never only ships, or coal, or soldiers. It was something quieter than that. The ability to make other people believe a promise. And near the end of this story, that same skill very nearly cracks. Welcome back to Era Speak. Most people know one date from English history, 1066. That year, a foreign army crossed the sea, killed an English king in battle, and took the crown. It is often called the last successful invasion of England. That is not quite true. In 1688, a Dutch army landed on the English coast, led by a Dutch prince named William of Orange. Within weeks, King James II had fled the country. Parliament offered the crown to William and his wife Mary, and the two of them ruled together. Historians call what happened exactly what it was: an invasion. It came after an invitation from a small group of powerful English nobles. There was little large-scale fighting inside England itself. But the wider conflict, especially in Ireland, was far from bloodless. England had learned something painful across those centuries. Geography did not make an island automatically safe. It made control of the surrounding sea a matter of survival. That lesson became real in 1588. Spain, then the most powerful country in Europe, sent a massive fleet, the Spanish Armada, to invade England. Queen Elizabeth I had ruled the country for 30 years. English ships used fireships to break its tight formation near Calais, and the fleet scattered. Storms then wrecked many of the ships as they tried to sail home around Scotland and Ireland. Bad weather, supply problems, Dutch resistance, and English ships together stopped the invasion. England survived. But the Armada taught a harder lesson than simple survival. Ruling the sea was never free. Ships had to be built, repaired, and paid for, year after year, war after war. That problem finally found an answer after 1688. William's invasion did more than remove one king. It changed the way England was governed. Under the Bill of Rights of 1689, the king could no longer raise taxes or keep an army without Parliament's approval. If William wanted money for his wars, he had to keep asking Parliament for it, again and again. This changed everything. In 1694, London merchants and the English government created something new: the Bank of England. England adapted financial ideas already tested in the Dutch Republic. Then it shaped them into a system of its own. Government debt was no longer based mainly on one ruler's personal promise. Parliament could raise taxes to pay the interest on that debt year after year. That made the promise easier to trust. England still had to fight its wars the hard way, on land and at sea. But now it could also keep paying for ships, for soldiers, for allies, long after richer rivals ran out of money. France was larger. France was richer. England began winning long wars anyway, one budget at a time. In 1707, England formally united with Scotland to form Great Britain. The financial machine built in London now served a larger, stronger state. But trust is never automatic, and in 1720, Britain learned that the hard way. A company called the South Sea Company took over part of the national debt. In exchange, it gave investors shares in its own stock. People rushed to buy and sell those shares, hoping to get rich quickly, and prices shot up fast. Investors from every level of society joined in, some risking much of what they owned. Then, within months, the whole plan fell apart. Thousands of people were ruined almost overnight. If people stopped believing the system was honest, how would Britain ever pay for its next war? Parliament investigated the collapse. Several politicians were exposed or punished, and the government changed how the debt was managed. The Bank of England helped hold the wider system together. Public trust was badly shaken, but it did not break. Britain had learned something it would need to relearn again and again. Trust is never permanent. It survives only if it is defended when it is tested. Over the century that followed, this financial machine quietly funded something enormous. It helped build an empire stretching across India, the Caribbean, and North America. Companies such as the East India Company raised money in these same London credit markets. Slowly, private investment turned into a private army. And that private army turned into colonial rule. The same culture of credit that had helped pay for wars could also support something else entirely. A canal or a railway cost far more than any one person could afford. Investors had to place their money into projects that might take years to pay them back. Industry did not depend only on new inventions. It also depended on trust. Trust that contracts would be kept and that profits would eventually arrive. The same trust that financed fleets began financing machines. Industrialization did not happen for one single reason. Britain had coal and iron close together underground. It had rivers, busy ports, and a financial system willing to invest in untested ideas. New machines changed one industry after another. Steam engines pumped water out of coal mines. Then they powered factories that no longer needed to sit beside a river. Spinning and weaving were once slow work, done by hand at home. Now they moved into huge cotton mills that ran day and night. Iron rails soon connected these mills to ports and cities faster than any horse ever could. Once the process began, empire and industry started to feed each other. The empire gave Britain more raw materials and bigger markets. British factories used them to make goods cheaper and faster than anywhere else on Earth. By the early 1800s, Britain had become the first industrial nation the world had ever seen. No other country had gone through a change like this before. This system was not built on trust alone. The Royal Navy protected the trade routes that made it possible. Colonial rule took wealth from conquered lands. Some of the most valuable goods in this new economy came at a terrible cost. Sugar from the Caribbean and cotton from the American South depended directly on enslaved labor. Britain's credit also reached beyond its own factories. Napoleon had armies spread across Europe. Britain had something different: the credit to keep his enemies fighting. Using taxes and borrowed money, the British government paid other countries to keep fighting Napoleon year after year. At the height of the Victorian Age, Britain was the world's leading industrial and financial power. It ruled an empire so vast that people said the sun never set on it. Roughly 1 in 4 people on Earth lived under some form of British rule. That kind of power could not last forever. 2 world wars, fought only a generation apart, drained Britain's money, its young men, and its confidence. In 1956, Britain tried to take back control of Egypt's Suez Canal. The attempt collapsed under pressure from its own ally, the United States. It was proof that Britain could no longer act alone as a great power. India, once the empire's largest colony, became independent in 1947. Colony after colony followed in the decades that came after. The empire that once covered a quarter of the globe quietly came apart. But the real turning point wasn't a lost war or a colony breaking away. It came in 1976, and it had almost nothing to do with an enemy. By the mid-1970s, Britain was struggling. Inflation was high, government debt was growing, and the price of oil had suddenly jumped. Investors around the world began losing confidence in the British pound. Its value on international markets started falling fast. Britain was a founding member of the International Monetary Fund. It was a country that had once lent money to nations across the world. Now it had to ask for emergency help. In December, Britain and the IMF agreed on a loan of $3.9 billion. It was the largest loan the IMF had ever given to any country. Britain never used all of it and paid the loan back early. But the fact that it had to ask mattered almost as much as the money itself. For generations, the world had trusted Britain's promises enough to lend it money, cheaply and easily. In 1976, for the first time in living memory, that old trust finally cracked. Britain had not run out of history, but it had run out of the right to live on its old reputation. If Britain's fall from global lender to IMF borrower surprised you, tell us in the comments. And if this story is changing how you see power, leave a like. Britain's story did not end there. Even before the 1976 crisis, London had quietly begun building a new kind of power. Since the 1950s, international banks had been using London to trade dollars outside the United States. This became known as the euro-dollar market. In 1986, the government removed many old rules from London's financial markets, in a change known as the Big Bang. It brought even more international business into the city. London became one of the world's leading financial centers again, without ruling a single new colony. Britain also gained one unplanned advantage from its lost empire: the English language. British ships and colonial officials first carried it around the world. Then American power and global trade carried it even further. Britain never fully controlled that spread, but it never stopped benefiting from it either. What Britain could actually build was different. Companies around the world still choose British law to settle their business disputes. British universities draw students from every continent, and the BBC keeps reaching audiences in dozens of languages. A shipping contract between a company in Singapore and a company in Brazil might still say something surprising. Any dispute will be settled under English law in a London court. It is a strange kind of power, one that needs no soldiers at all. Music, publishing, and television exports kept British culture present in homes it no longer governed. This new kind of power was quieter, and it did not solve all of Britain's economic problems. But it let the country stay influential long after direct rule had ended. Britain could no longer dominate the world, so it learned to remain useful to it. 3 times, Britain changed the way it turned its resources into power. First, public credit helped pay for fleets and long wars. Then finance, coal, and invention helped build the world's first industrial economy. Finally, after its empire was gone, Britain relied more on finance, law, language, and culture. Each new system grew partly out of the one before it. Reinvention did not mean throwing the past away. It meant finding a new use for what remained. But the deepest lesson here isn't that trust always survives. In 1720, it nearly didn't. In 1976, it visibly cracked. Trust is not something a country owns forever. It survives only when institutions continue giving people reasons to believe. From a damp island overshadowed by its neighbors, to the empire on which the sun never set, to a quieter power built on finance, law, and culture, Britain kept changing. This is really the story of a country that kept reinventing what power means. There's another side to one chapter in this story. Watch our video on France, right here on the channel. It shows how Britain's oldest rival turned prestige into its own kind of lasting influence. And if you want a new history story like this one, built to help you practice real English, every 2 days, subscribe. The next one is already on its way.